So it occurred to me that when doing the last one, that I left out a couple of pretty important movies, and uh, just because I don't own them, I didn't really think about them. So in the first part, I think I was getting ready to go into 87, and just gone over Fright Night, and before that Martin. But there was one in 79 that I think really influenced the genre, and that was Salem's Lot, which was of course based off a Stephen King book, directed by Tobe Hooper. It's one of the few Tobe Hooper films that I really like after Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And this one, it's notable for a couple of reasons, and one of them was it was the first one of those films that I can really remember where they put the contacts and stuff in that had the real um, amber look to the vampires in the film. It gave them that look of kind of almost like headlights or something, or cat's eyes that glow in the dark. And of course, everybody always remembers the scene with the kids scratching on the window and all that. And it was a very good miniseries. I guess it wasn't a film; it was a miniseries. But so we're gonna move up, and that one, of course, was based on the book, which the book was more of a traditional vampire story. So you go to 85, and you got Tom Holland's Fright Night, which is more of an up-to-date version of the Bela Lugosi films. You go on to 87, and you've got the film that it took, like most of these other films, it took the aesthetic, what do you want to call it, the zeitgeist of the time, and just infused it into the old principle of vampires. And you had basically modern rock vampires, and that one is, of course, The Lost Boys. And this is the first time, even when I was a kid, I noticed this when I saw this film for the first time, that you had these guys that were kind of retro. Like, if you remember, just not even the fact that they were vampires, but this is one of the first times I can remember watching a film where the people in it were actually like retro and had like a vibe of going back to a previous time. Because when you go into the vampire's cave in Lost Boys, like the very first scene where you meet all of the vampires, and David and Michael get acquainted and all that stuff, there's the big Jim Morrison poster that's up on the back of the wall and stuff. And the whole film, it just had like a vibe of, these guys were all very James Deanish, kind of quality to them. And so Corey Haim, Corey Feldman, they move to a new place. I believe it's Santa Monica, and Corey Haim does. And Corey Haim and what's the guy's name? I always forget his name. Jason Patric. And Corey Haim and Jason Patric move in. They're around town one time. They find out that Corey Haim finds out through his brother being transformed into a vampire by David, who he meets at like a carnival, and who he's trying to meet new friends and stuff like that, and he gets attached to Jamie Gertz, and Jamie Gertz is kind of like a lure, like she's used as bait by David to lure these new potential vampires in, and that's how, or I guess just bait in, and that's how they meet. And I actually thought that Kiefer Sutherland as David gives a really good performance as kind of like the rebellious vampire. And Corey Feldman and the guy that played the other, Jameson Newlander, I think, because they're like the Frog Brothers, who are like kind of like an updated take on the Peter Cushing vampire killer kind of thing. I always thought that they did a really good job. They're just they're young, but they're very dark and kind of cynical, and it's like the combination of both those things. It's so unusual that it works really well. So there's a lot of rock music in this film. There's like lubed up saxophone guys, and beach parties and Doors references and hip shit going on all over the place. But it's still a very entertaining film directed by Richard Donner, who it was directed by Joel Schumacher. I always get those two confused. The executive producer was Richard Donner. So it's very entertaining film though. So we move on. Actually, we're going to stay in the same year. We're moving on to if this film was like the slick nouveau film vampire film, then this film you're talking about was like the Western vampire film. And a lot of people love it, think it's the greatest thing ever. This is Near Dark. It's got Bill Paxton, Lance Henriksen, directed by Catherine Bam Bam Bigelow, who I'm not positive, but I think she directed The Hurt Locker, which is like one of the big Oscar contenders for this year, and it's on everybody's top 10 list of new films. And really, her and Mary Harron, the woman that directed American Psycho, are my two favorite female horror directors. And a lot of people like this film because the vampires are nothing like any of the other vampires. Like, even in The Lost Boys, the vampires kind of were sexy and sensual and had that kind of charm to them. In this film, really they're just scumbags. They're like biker scumbag types that are kind of world travelers and almost like nomads. Like they go from place to place, and they use the pretty woman as bait, and there's a little kid that's a vampire, and they use him as bait to attract victims, and they're kind of just like shit kickers, and they're outlaws, and that's the part of the film that draws people in. Like, not since probably Martin was a film where you had such an unsympathetic and unglamorous vampire film as Near Dark. And Jeanette Goldstein's in it too. It's basically like a fucking Aliens reunion now that I think about it. Bill Paxton, Jeanette Goldstein, Lance Henriksen. They all work really well together though in the film. I don't like it as much as like most people that there's people that just think it's like the best vampire film ever made. I don't think it's not in the same category to me as The Lost Boys and Fright Night. Definitely say that. But it's a good film, and it's like the antithesis of Twilight. This film is like, it's if Twilight's on this end, then Near Dark's on this end, and they don't mix. So the next one, we're going to move up to the 90s. So you've cycled through Fright Night, which was kind of a take back to the 30s. You've gone through Near Dark, which is kind of like a modern biker western vampire flick. You go into, it started around 1990. The horror comedy, and this is one of those films where I don't think that this film was a product of the time that it came up. I think this is like one of the most original vampire films, for better or worse, that ever came out, just because it doesn't take anything from the time period which it comes out. It just creates its own subgenre, and actually it's pretty funny that it gets ripped off now, but I'll talk about that. You've got Sundown, the Vampire in Retreat, which is, it's like a western, mostly a comedy. It's got horror and dramatic parts to it. It's like a dark comedy, and it's got Emmett Walsh and Deborah Foreman, David Carradine, Bruce Campbell. I forget who plays the lead guy in it. The lead hero-ish kind of guy. There's a couple of guys in it anyway. It's about this town where everybody's a vampire, but they manufacture their own synthetic blood because they have a leader who's taught them that it's not good to kill humans, and if they can live off this blood, that it's a synthetic blood, then they don't have to kill humans, so they can just kind of coexist. And Deborah Foreman's like the hot vampire, and Bruce Campbell's like this bumbling Van Helsing character. He's basically playing Ash, but more of like a clueless, bumbling Ash character in this one. And he stumbles into this town, and it's being they don't break the fact that they're just like normal people to outsiders or anything like that. But Emmett Walsh is kind of like the grumpy one who wants to go back to the way it was. And I'm trying to remember the guy's name. There's another vampire who is he wants things to go back to the way that they are, and there's like a conflict between David Carradine's good vampire and this guy's evil vampire. It's just, oh god, it's a bizarre movie. It's so out of place in the time period that it came out. So, but the funny thing about that is the whole concept that everybody's a vampire in this place, and they make their own synthetic blood. I don't remember the name of the blood, but I don't remember if it has a name in this one. But you fast forward to today, and you got True Blood, which is the same concept, really. The vampires have kind of taken over, but now they coexist because they make this synthetic blood, and it's kind of weird. So, okay, so from there, I guess I'll stop the thing right here, and we'll go from Sundown we'll go from 1990 to 1992 for the next one, and it's a really underrated one too. So here we go.